You know, the first wave of calls for Northam's resignation nationally came from those either running or considering a run for president, including my next guest, who just spent 3 days in Iowa, Democratic Senator Sherrod Brown of Ohio. Senator Brown, welcome back to Meet the Press.
Good to be back. Thank you.
Look, you added your names. You said he's got to go. He doesn't want to go. Let me ask the question this way. Is there anything he could do to convince you he should remain in the public square to lead in the healing?
Well, he should remain in the public square by explaining and talking and working to heal, but he should do it from a position of private citizen. And I agree with Congresswoman Bass and Congressman McEachin. I thought their insights were very important. I think he should resign now. He then can contribute to this dialogue, but as I said, he should do it as a private citizen.
What does it say that something like this is now, folks are now being held accountable for blackface in ways, frankly, that we didn't have that strong of a moral code, I would argue, in our politics until recently. Why do you think that is?
Well, I think this country hasn't dealt well with the issues of race. I mean, we have a president who's a racist. We have.
Let me pause you there. That's just that you believe in his heart he's a racist.
Well, I don't know what in his heart means. I know that he built his political career knowing what he was doing on questioning the legitimacy and the birthplace of the President of the United States. I know early that there have been all kinds of news reports about what he did early in his career on housing. We know, read the new Jim Crow by Michelle Alexander, read The Color of Law about housing discrimination and decades and decades and decades of housing discrimination. And we know that the Trump family, including the now sitting president, played to that and deepened that. So these issues, this is not a recess. Charlottesville was only a symptom and a more public viewing and outing, if you will, of the president's views about race. I mean, there's just no question about that. We know the president doesn't tell the truth frequently. Yep. We know he lies frequently. And we know of his racist comments and background.
You spent the last couple
and that's not even counting, Chuck. That's not even counting the policies of this administration. We have consent decrees all over this country, including in Cleveland. We have a Justice Department that's turned its back on it. We know about voter suppression. I was Secretary of State of Ohio. My job when I was Secretary of State was to encourage people of all races to vote, especially young people and especially young people of color. And we worked at that. We now have a government that suppresses the vote, and we know what happened in Georgia, and we know what happened in Florida.
One of the ways you've talked about your potential candidacy for president while you were in Iowa, you talk about talking to the working class voters that you thought Democrats had been ignoring. There is a racial component to that conversation as far as some are concerned, that the white working class vote, it's a cultural reason that even though the Democratic policies maybe they agree with, but there's cultural reasons why they're not comfortable with the Democratic Party. How do you bridge that divide? Because it feels like race plays a role in this.
Well, listen to what we've been saying, whether it's in Iowa or when I'm going to South Carolina in a couple of weeks, or our hometown of Cleveland, and where Connie and I live in a racially mixed neighborhood, of course. And when you talk about the dignity of work, I'm talking about all workers, whether you swipe a badge or punch a clock, whether you're working on salary or working for tips, whether you shower before work or after work, whether you're raising kids, and always recognizing that women and people of color have even more challenges in the workplace in terms of wages, in terms of benefits, in terms of schedules, where they arrange child care and their employer then changes their hours that they're working. So the dignity of work is clearly all workers in this country, and if it's a pitch to the broad numbers of people in this country that aren't treated well, that work hard every day and simply aren't getting ahead. If you love your country, you fight for the people who make it work across all races, and that's the theme of my campaign. If I do run for president, it's certainly the theme of the dignity of work.
You know, you said something else to Yahoo News earlier this week. You were talking about your election in Ohio, your recent re-election. You said, there are 88 counties in Ohio. I won 16 of them, and I won the state by 7 points. But in many of those other 72 counties, we got emasculated. There weren't even close. there's this awful divide between the metro areas and the smaller towns. What did you mean by emasculated there? And what is the divide? What is the divide?
That may have not been exactly the right word. Maybe massacred, maybe blown away. What did President Obama say when, after the 10 elections, he had a really good word about how we didn't do so well in some states? I mean, it's one of the reasons in Iowa we started in 15 below zero weather. We started in Cresco, Iowa, and went to Clear Lake and went to Mason City and went to smaller towns because Wall Street overlooks bypasses those towns, and state and federal government just ignores those towns, like my hometown of Mansfield. And those towns are often racially mixed. This isn't a diverse metro area versus a white rural area. These are small towns that are hurt from globalization, hurt from a tax policy. In the president's tax law, you shut down production in Dubuque, where we were this week and had a great turnout. You shut down production in Dubuque and move overseas, you get a 50% off coupon on your taxes. That's the problem. That's what we're doing to these small cities in rural areas, whether it's Iowa or Ohio or California.
I want to talk about some of the issues that could divide Democrats a bit. One of them is the issue of universal health care. And you've got some that are calling for Medicare for all. You got Michael Bloomberg, who almost seems to share a little bit of your frustration when it comes to overpromising. Take a listen to what Michael Bloomberg said in responding to a whole bunch of these ideas.
I'm a little bit tired of listening to things that are pie in the sky that we never are going to pass or never going to afford. I think it's just disingenuous to promote those things.
You seem to say that you were asked about Medicare for all, and while you said kind things about it, you seem to express a similar frustration. We talk about it, make no progress. That's a mistake. How do you campaign on incrementalism when some voters want big, bold change that probably is difficult to follow through with?
Well, nobody's accused me in my career of being an incrementalist. I have always fought for bold change. I live in a state, Ohio. I represent a state where Trump's promises of bringing back jobs and reindustrialization and opening up new factories have clearly just fallen flat. I mean, he's done nothing on these promises. So I know a whole lot about a president over-promising and breaking those promises and selling out and betraying workers. Let me answer the question this way. I was in Dubuque. A woman came up to me, early 60s. She told us that she told Connie and me her husband had died of cancer. She had quit her job to take care of him. She is very anxious about what happens with her health care now. So I want to expand Medicare. I'm for universal coverage. I promised in my first congressional race I'd pay my own insurance until Congress passed it. I did for years pay my own insurance. Connie and I are now on the Obamacare exchanges with millions of other people getting our insurance. But I have helped to write with Senator Whitehouse of Rhode Island, the public option, and we've worked for Medicare for all. I want to help people quickly. I want to pass Medicare at 55 or even 50 so she can get coverage and her life can improve and she can have that anxiety allayed so she can have a better life with her kids and her grandkids. That's what I want to see done.
All right, Senator Brown, unfortunately I have to leave it there. Much appreciate you coming on, sharing your views, and we hope to see you first when you make your final decision. Thank you, Senator.
All right, thank you for that.
Hey, NBC News fans, thanks for checking out our YouTube channel. Subscribe by clicking on that button down here, and then click on any of the videos over here to watch the latest interviews, show highlights, and digital exclusives. Thanks for watching.